Hello, I'm the Clockwork Critic, and welcome to this review of Reckless Kelly. Set in the near future, Reckless Kelly focuses on Ned Kelly, bank robber and fictional version of the real Ned Kelly. It even goes so far as to have the main character wearing a cobbled together version of the real Ned Kelly's armour on the poster. Before we go any further, I should probably take a minute to explain who the hell Ned Kelly actually was. Ned Kelly was a bushranger in the 1870s. The story goes that he and his family were unfairly persecuted for being Irish Australian Catholics, and after a particularly damning incident involving a police officer claiming to have been assaulted with a revolver, Ned and his brother ran out to the bush, knowing they wouldn't get a fair trial. They met up with two of their friends and killed some police officers that were trying to capture them. After this, the Kelly gang became bank robbers, famous for four things. First, they used cunning and guile to commit their robberies rather than just brute force. Second, they never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill them. Third, they burned mortgage deeds to give the houses back to the people who really owned them rather than the bank. And fourth, they wore homemade bulletproof armour that's now become iconic. The main problem with the armour was that it had no leg protection, and at the famous last stand at the Glenrowan Inn, the entire Kelly gang was finally taken down. Ned was the only one to survive long enough to make it to trial. He was found guilty of murder and hanged. Apparently his last words were, "Such is life." Ned Kelly has become a sort of Australian folk hero over the years, representing a small group of people banding together to fight off the bully boys no matter what the cost. So now let's have a look at the 1993 movie dedicated to his memory. As the credits roll, we're treated to an upside down shot of the ocean. Okay, we get it, Australia's in the southern hemisphere, so everything's upside down. Ha ha. Can we move on, please? Thank you. We now approach Reckless Island, home of our protagonist. We're introduced to the Kelly gang, a family of bank robbers who've been robbing banks for as long as they've been banks, and always give their ill-gotten gains to the poor. We now meet Ned Kelly, capable of shooting a fly out of the air and played by Yahoo Serious. And, yes, he changed his name to that legally. Ned's junk bucket bike that he built himself is refueled, and in the first stupid moment of this movie, if you don't include the fly being shot out of the air, he fixes a leak in the fuel pump with gum. As he burns off towards the city, we find out that Reckless Island is a national park he considers perfection. He proceeds to rob a bank by intimidating an ATM and shooting it.
You know, I think this is a problem they'd fix pretty fast.
If their ATMs just spewed money whenever they were damaged, I think they'd go out of business pretty bloody quickly. He takes the bag of stolen money into the bank and forces them to deposit it into the accounts of people who can't pay their loans this month. You know, I really think they're just going to take the money out again once you leave. Doesn't matter that you're getting receipts. In any case, at this point we meet the love interest of this movie, the horrifically named Robin Banks. She's reading Shakespeare, so I think she's supposed to be cultured. But since she's just saying the same line over and over, I really think she just comes off as pretentious. And I don't think a bank would allow anyone to stick that many slogan stickers on one of their monitors. Ned takes his bag of receipts out the front door and walks straight into a police ambush. And they proceed to calmly wait while he puts the receipt bag on the back of his bike. Not that it matters, because when they do open fire, they can't hit a perfectly stationary target, while Ned proceeds to shoot the guns out of their hands and deflate tyres and other such superheroic behaviour. Wait, I get what this movie is now. It's an action comedy spoof. Ned does take a couple of hits, but burns off on his bike, accidentally dropping a bar towel from the Glenrowan Hotel in the process. Why was he carrying that exactly? Robin's still pretentiously quoting Shakespeare from the book she's reading, and is told to go upstairs and give the towel to Sir John, the chief executive of the bank, played by Hugo Weaving. We also meet Major Wibb, an ex-military specialist who's been called in to help Sir John with the Kelly problem. Hang on, this is an action comedy spoof about one man's struggle against the corporate banks, and it stars Hugo Weaving and Alexei freaking Sale as the villains. This is gonna be awesome! Using the towel, the Major is able to figure out where Ned Kelly and his family are based. I guess following that junkyard that he drives was just too much hassle for them. Sir John decides the easiest way to deal with this is to use his political connections to allow him to sell the island. the National Park Island. Hang on a minute. Look, if your political connections are that good and he lives on an island, why don't you just set up a police roadblock and capture him that way? Or hell, go whole hog, go completely overboard. Call in the army, the navy, the air force. Ask for help capturing a known criminal who is armed and dangerous and clearly too much for the police. Back at the hotel, we see a shot of a gun hanging on the wall, which is bound to be a plot point later. And Ned explains that due to being shot a lot, the Kelly family have a natural tolerance to it. You know, I'm fairly convinced that just because your ancestors were shot a lot doesn't confer a natural pain resistance to bullet wounds to you. Nevertheless, we see Ned absent-mindedly digging a bullet out of his leg while watching a movie called The Hollywood Outlaw. What's the point? Why are you showing clips from a fictional movie in your own movie? I really would expect a movie that only clocks in at 80 minutes to have less padding than this. After restating that they can't use any money that they steal for their own benefit, Ned suddenly realises he's been shot in the lung again. His Uncle Dan taps him on the back and the bullet comes firing out the hole. The dog retrieves some band-aids for him and he plugs up the gap. Oh, okay, so it's a black comedy now? Well, at least he's got the idea for armour now, so I guess he'll go off and make it. No? What do we get instead?
Ready? Cornflakes. No, fella. Cornflakes. Cornflakes. Come on, talk.
Awesome. The postman turns up with a letter explaining that Reckless Island is going to be sold and relocated to Tokyo Bay, Japan. What? Okay, maybe the guys in the bank can explain. Wait a minute, how did they get up to the top floor of the main building of a massive corporate bank, especially with that huge pile of paper and clay tablets? They explain that it's all birth certificates and that there's been Kellys living on the island for thousands of years, so they get first purchase rights. Okay, so the movie's about Aboriginal land rights. Or Australian republicanism? Anyway, Sir John agrees that yes, they can, but they'll have to match the bid already put in.
$1 million.
They go back to the island to mull things over, and next morning we finally see Ned in his armour, which is so heavy he falls through the floor. He explains that it's so he could go and rob a lot of banks in a very short period of time to save the island. Once again, they tell him that he can't keep any money he steals in Australia, so he goes to America to rob banks there, because that's allowed, apparently. You know, even before the World Trade Center was destroyed, I'm fairly convinced they didn't let you carry guns on the plane. After a brief scene with some very creepy accountants, Sir John sends the Major off to America to follow Ned Kelly, admonishing him not to use a gun himself because they're an international bank. And now we're back on the plane with Ned. Seriously, what's with all the back and forth in this movie? And then we hear a very familiar voice still reading Shakespeare aloud, so pretentious and inconsiderate. I'm really warming to her character. Turns out she's on her way to England to go to an acting school after having been fired from the bank for sending the message that told the Kellys about the sale. Because I'm sure they didn't need to tell the current residents about the fact the island was being sold. We cut to Ned driving his... Wait, he had the money to get his bike here too? Well, given it needs to be refueled with an aviation fuel nozzle, you may have a few problems with that. Oh, and we see his helmet has now got a much wider gap in it. I guess Yahoo decided he needed to be seen more in this film.